Hi guys, it's the day 56 and today we're gonna get done with the Handbook of Hymen. This story I started a couple days ago. And let's begin. It has, says Mrs. Simpson, even since I knew him, he has been reciting, reciting to me a lot of irregular, irreligious rhythms by some person he calls Ruby out, and who is no better than she should be, if you judge by her poetry. Then Idaho has struck a new book, says I. For the one he had was by a man who writes under the nom de plume of K.M. He'd better have stuck on it to it, says Mrs. Simpson. Whatever it was. And today he caps the vortex. I get a bunch of flowers from him, and on them is pinned he, in on them he's pinned a note. Now, Mr. Brett, you know a lady when you see her, and you know now I, s- I stand in the Rosa Society. Do you think for a moment that I would skip out to the woods with a man alone with a jug of wine and a loaf of bread and go singing and cavorting, cavorting up and down under the trees with him? I take a little colored claret claret with my meals, but I'm not in the habit of packing a jug of it into the brush and raising Cain in any such style as that. And of course he'd bring his book of verses along too. He said so. Let him go on his scandalous picnics alone, or let him take his ruby oath with him. I reckon she wouldn't kick unless it was on account of or there being too much bread alone. And what do you think of your gentleman friend now, Mr. Pratt? Well, saying it may be that Idaho's invitation was a kind of poetry and meant no harm. Maybe it belonged to the class of rhythms they call figurative. They often law and order, but they get sent through the mails on the ground that they mean something they don't say. I'd be glad on Idaho's account if you'd overlook it, says I, and let us extri- extricate our minds from the low regions of poetry to the higher planes of fact and fancy. On a beautiful afternoon like this, Mrs. Simpson, I goes on. We should let our thoughts dwell accordingly. Though it is warm here, we should remember that at the equator, the line of perpetual frost is an is at an altitude on 15,000 feet. Between the latitudes of 40 degrees and 49 degrees, it is from 4,000 to 9,000 feet. Oh, Mr. Pratt, says Mrs. Simpson. It's such a comfort to hear you say them beautiful facts after getting such a jar from that minx of a Ruby's poetry. Let us sit on this log at the roadside, says I, and forget the inhumanity and ribaldry, ribal, ribaldry, dry, ribaldry of the poets. It is in glorious columns of ascertained facts and legalized measures that beauty is to be found. In that very log we sit upon, Mr. Simpson, says I, is statistics more wonderful than any poem. The rings show it was 60 years old. At the depth of 2,000 feet, it would become coal in 3,000 years. The deepest coal mine in the world is at Killingworth, Worth, Killingworth, near Newcastle. A box 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 2 feet 8 inches deep would hold 1 ton of coal. If an artery is cut, compress it above the wound. A man's leg contains 30 bones. The Tower of London was burnt in 1841. Go on, Mr. Pratt, says Mrs. Simpson. Them ideas is so original and soothing. I think statistics are just as lovely as they can be. But it wasn't till 2 weeks later that I got all that was coming to me out of Herkimer. Herkimer. One night, I was waked up by folks hollering fire all around. I jumped up and dressed and went out of the hotel to enjoy the scene. When I seen it was Mrs. Simpson's house, I gave forth I gave forth a kind of yell, and I was there in 2 minutes. The whole lower story of the yellow house was in flames, and every masculine, feminine, and canini in Rosa was there, screeching and barking and getting in the way of the firemen. I saw Idaho trying to get away from 6 firemen who were holding him. They was telling him the whole place was on fire downstairs, and no man could go in it and come out alive. Where is Mrs. Simpson? I asks. She hasn't been seen, says one of the firemen. She sleeps upstairs. We've tried to get in, but we can't. And our company hasn't got any letters yet. I ran I runs around runs around to the light of the big blaze and pulls the handbook out of my inside pocket. I counted laughed. I can't off laughed laughed when I felt it in my hands. I reckon I was summed up with the sensation of excitement. Herky, old boy, say I says to it, and I flipped over the pages. You ain't ever lied to me yet, and you ain't ever throwed me down at the scratch yet. Tell me what, old boy, tell me what, says I. I turn to what to do in case of accidents on page 117. I ran my finger down the page and struck it. Struck struck it. Good old Herkimer, he never overlooked anything. It said, suffocating, suffocating from inhaling smoke or gas. There is nothing better than flax seed. Place a few seed in one outer corner on the eye of the eye. I showed the handbook back to my shoot. The handbag back to my pocket and grabbed a boy that was running by. Here, says I, giving him some money. Run to the drugstore and bring $1 worth of flax seed. Hurry, and you'll get another one for yourself. Now, I sing out to the crowd. I sings out to the crowd. We'll have Mrs. Simpson. And I throws away my coat and hat. Four of the firemen and citizen grabs hold of me. It's sure, it's sure death, they say, to go in the house, for the floors was beginning to fall through. For the floors was beginning to fall through. How it not how in blazes I signs out, kind of laughing yet, but not feeling like it. Do you accept me to put flaxseed in an eye without the eye? I jabbed each elbow in a fireman's face, kicked the bark off of one citizen's shin, and tripped the other one with the side hold. And then I busted into the house. If I die first, I'll write you a letter and tell you if it's any worse down there than the upside that the inside of that yellow house was. But don't believe it yet. I was a heap more cooked than the hurry up orders of broiled chicken that you get in restaurants. The fire and smoke had me down on the floor twice and was about to shame Herkimer, but the firemen helped me with their little stream of water, and I got to the Mrs. Simpson's room. She'd lost Since tensions, consist, con, conscientiousness from the smoke, so I wrapped her in the bedclothes and got her on my shoulder. Well, the floors wasn't as bad as they say, or I never could have done it. Not by no means. I carried her out 50 yards from the house and laid her on the grass. Then, of course, every of them, other 22 plain, plain thieves, to the lady's hand crowded around with the tin dippers of water, ready to save her. And up runs the boy with the flax seed. I unwrapped the covers from Mrs. Simpson's hat. She opened her eyes and says, "Is that you, Mr. Pratt?" Shh, says I. Don't talk till you had the remedy. I runs my arm around her neck and raises her hand, gentle, and breaks the bag of flax seeds with the other hand. And as easy as I could, I bends over and slips 3 or 4 of the seeds in the outer corner of her eye. Up gallops the village dog by this time and snorts around and grabs Mrs. Simpson's pulse and wants to know what I mean by such sandblasted nonsense. Well, old Jalop and Jerusalem Oxide, says I. I'm not regular practitioner, but I'll show you my authority anyway. They fetch my coat and I get out the handbook. Look on the page 117, says I. At the remedy of suffocation by smoke or gas. Flaxseed, it, in the outer corner of the eye, it says. I don't know whether it works as a smoke consumer or whether it hikes the compound gastra hippopotamus nerve into action, but Herkimer says it. And he was called to the case first. If you want to make a consultation, there is no objection. Old Doc takes the book and looks at it by means of his specs and the fireman's lantern. Well, Mr. Pratt, says he, you evidently got on the wrong line in reading your diagnosis. Oof. Well, Mr. Pratt, says he, you evidently got on the wrong line in reading your diagnosis. The receipt for suffocation says, get the patient into fresh air and as quickly as possible, and place in a resilient position. The flax seed remedy is for dust and cedars in the eye on the line above. But after all, see here, interrupts Mrs. Simpson. I reckon I've got something to say in the consultation. That flax seed done me more good than anything I ever tried. And then she raises up her head and lays on the back and lays it back on my arm again and says, "Put some in the other eye, Sandy, dear. And so if you was to stop off at Rosa tomorrow or other day, you'd see a fine yellow house with Mr. Mrs. Pratt. That was Mrs. Simpson embellishing and adoring it. And if you was to step inside, you'd see on the marble top center table in the parlor Herkimer's Handbook of Indispensable Information, all rebound in red morocco, and ready to be consulted on any subject per- pertaining to human happiness and wisdom. All right, guys, thank you for listening to me again, and see you tomorrow on the next story. Bye.